Good evening, everyone. This is Lindsay Shea, and welcome to June's ACR RFS AI Journal Club. Tonight, we are going to be joined by Bibb Allen and Curtiz Langlotz. But first, we are going to have Dan Cohen give us a brief overview of the article. So take it away, Dan.
Okay, thank you. So hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the AI Journal Club. My name is Dan Cohen, currently a resident at SUNY Downstate, New York. So I wasn't sure if I would present everything from the beginning, but I just wanted again to thank the Advisory Council for helping choosing the article and all the organization. And as a reminder, like all the discussion will be available online on the ACR Journal Club website, and you can always tweet along on hashtag #RadAIJC. I was just asked as a reminder about this survey, about an international survey on AI radiology. So if you can participate, like your opinion will be very appreciated. So in regards to the article of today is called A Roadmap for Foundational Research on Artificial Intelligence in Medical Imaging. And before I start, I really wanted to thank the panelists who took a part to write the article and took the time to join us today. Both are truly amazing people and leaders in our field. Dr. Curtiz Langlotz, which among many of his roles is currently the director of the Center of Artificial Intelligence in Medicine and Imaging at Stanford, and Dr. Bibb Allen, who is the Chief Medical Officer of the American College of Radiology Data Science Institute. So thanks again for joining us. I personally found this article very relevant for residents to understand where we currently stand and what are the challenges and opportunities for anyone trying to be involved with AI. Interestingly, many of the topics were actually discussed in prior journal clubs. And this article is actually the first part of two articles where here we describe the foundational research steps with AI and imaging. The second part is, which was actually recently released in May 28, is focusing how to translate the research to practice. And this will hopefully be the next journal club. Now, everything began in August 2, 2018, was where a two-day international workshop was organized with the participation of different societies, including the NIH, RSNA, ACR, and multiple stakeholders, including data scientists, radiologists, industry developers, and even government officials. And the topic was to discuss what is the current state of art of AI in medical imaging, and what are the current knowledge gaps. And the goal was to develop a roadmap for future research initiatives. So the task of this presentation is to elaborate on key research opportunities with specific attention to radiology and machine learning. And this illustration is taken from the article. I found it useful as it shows the life cycle in AI algorithm development from the very first step until the final product. Now, the ultimate goal of AI research in medical imaging is to create tools that will improve patient outcomes. These tools will optimally take the form of imaging decision support systems to provide actionable advices. And we're going to describe now the opportunities along the pathway. So the pathway starts actually with data collections, including having access to it, whether it's imaging, reports, and other relevant clinical data. Having the data is not enough. The data has to be ready before machine learning algorithm can be used. And that's where actually automatic methods to label and annotate the information is coming in, including imaging and reports. And only then the machine learning algorithms can be deployed and potentially act as classifier or detector and so on. Now, the software will probably work as a partner with a physician and will need to explain how the algorithm made its decision. And for example, here is a silence map. So that's pretty much an overlook of the discussion of today. And now we're going to go in slightly more details. So machine learning needs data. And there is tremendous amount of data out there. However, currently most of it is inaccessible. And even the few data sets which are accessible, most of them are not ready for AI, as they're not annotated or anonymized or even linked to the ground truth, such as pathology. Furthermore, many are from one single institute and lack the real-life variability. And here's a few examples. Like this example is from 2017 with a Mura database from Stanford with 3,000 images from upper extremities. Each study was manually labeled as normal or abnormal by board-certified radiologists. Then the NIH released the chest X-ray 8 with approximately 100,000 single-view chest X-rays, where the information was text mined with 8 common diseases with weak annotation process and labeling. Moving on to more recently, so like the Shakespeare database from Stanford using AP and lateral views of above 200,000 patients, where they were labeling 14 observations, including 5 common lung disease. So again, we have like very few publicly available databases, but most of them are not even ready yet for AI. And we start to have increasing amount of data sets which are being published. And it is like things that need to be discussed, but it's essential to establish guidelines and standards how to create these data sets. Another point is actually the concept of like the FAIR principle, which stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, which essentially address better ways for data collection and data management. So even if we have all the data sets available, one of the many issues is a restriction on personal health information. For example, the medical image folder is in DICOM formats, which contain images and personal health information. So to remove the information, we use open sources tools such as the MIRC CTP or the Medical Imaging Resource Center Clinical Trial Processor. However, this process isn't perfect, and sometimes the identification tools are missing PHI. As an example, here is an article from 2015 showing that among 7 softwares, only 5 could completely remove the PHI. More specifically, from those 5, 4 needed personal customization, which eventually means that only one program could automatically remove the PHI in a reliable manner. So research has to be done with large amount of data to evaluate the reliability of these current methods. And here we briefly discuss about data availability and data sharing, but moving to another step, which is image reconstruction. With all the hypes with image interpretation, there is increasing data that AI algorithm can actually improve or enhance image reconstruction methods. Here is an image enhancement task where there is both ASL sequences or arterial spin labeling sequence. So the difference is that the one on the right is of better quality, and however it takes 8 minutes. The one on the left is shorter, taking approximately 2 minutes, but the quality is less better. Now, interestingly, if we combine the anatomical information from different sequences, such as a T2 weighted image and a proton density, a synthetic ASL sequence is made with similar quality as actually the long one. And the implication can be huge, like we can potentially reduce scanning time or even reduce radiation dose or even the amount of contrast with CAT scans. And as an example here, we have like some raw data sets that was released in the 2018 RSNA and so-called the FAST MRI project, which was done in collaboration between NYU and Facebook. So data set included 10,000 knees MRI with their case spaces. And the goal was to reduce the scanning time using undersampling and machine learning reconstructions. So here is another point for research. There is the need to create more data sets and more raw data sets and algorithms. Now back to the data. So we have millions of clinical images which are stored on the PAC system. However, none of them is suitable currently for AI research since none of it is labeled or annotated. Just a few definitions before we start. Labeling is referring to classifying the entire image, and annotation is more specific, related to a particular portion of the image. And speaking of labeling, how amazing would it be if we could just automatically use a vast amount of information in the electronic medical records and label the images? For example, if we could extract the laboratory results suggestive of liver disease and just label automatically the liver as cirrhosis, for example. Now, this process is called electronic phenotyping. Now, one of the problems is the EMR has a lot of information which is unstructured or even incomplete sometimes. And so it's actually a good study from Vanderbilt University Medical Center where they could identify 10 diseases. The way they did it, it was by using a combination of different elements from the EMR, such as ICD codes, specific medication, or even NLP methods for free text reports. So by using a combination of different elements, they were able to reliably identify multiple diseases such as diabetes mellitus, Parkinson, multiple sclerosis, and so on. And actually, like the data sets, some of these phenotypes can be found online on libraries, and such as the phenotype knowledge base. However, if you start looking on the list, you will find that many of these existing phenotypes are not relevant for medical imaging yet. So there's actually a lot of research, maybe potentially, that can be done to develop electronic phenotypes techniques which are dedicated to imaging. Now, we briefly explained about the AMR, but we can actually extract data from the reports, and I believe this is one of the expertise of Dr. Langlotz, but there is a lot of information within the reports, not only the impression, but also the features of the pathology and information that help us derive the impression. And we use traditional rule-based natural language processing methods, which can identify different medical narratives and classify the report. However, these techniques may be efficient, but they require manual annotations, are supervised and quite tedious, and as far as I know, they're hard to scale. And recently it was published that unsupervised deep learning methods can actually yield better performance than prior techniques. And they can actually be scaled better with more information. So there is a place actually to develop new data extraction techniques from the reports using word embedding techniques or different neural networks methods. Now, so far we described a retrospective process of labeling where we have to go back and look for the information. Now, the best source of information is actually the expert who is putting the information for the first time. And when we think about it, wouldn't it be ideal if we can have a prospective process where we could incorporate the information in a structured way from the beginning without interfering with the normal workflow? And currently radiologists are producing reports. Traditionally, it was a freestyle report, which is fine for human consumption. However, the data is unstructured. And now there is a lot of useful information that it would be good if we can automatically extract the data. So we slowly move to structured report. Also, at least where I am, in practice, not everyone is using the structured reports yet. But that's actually a first step for organizing the information. And that brings us to an even more recent step where we speak about common data elements, or CDE, which described a standardized way to collect and organize information, including from the text and the imaging. And this concept is huge, as it allows automatic organization and usage of data. Here is a picture from the RSNA report website, where this is an attempt to develop standards for the reports. And here is a picture from the article describing software supporting the labeling and annotation process in a seamless fashion, where we can actually insert values such as ROI, measurements, and so on. So this will require actually dedicated working interfaces and infrastructure to incorporate the CD usage and structured reports. Moving to another field, and this image was taken actually from YouTube, from one of the previous journal club of the Mura with Dr. Stein, where she was describing the annotation process with MDAI. And currently the segmentation process is tedious, and which obviously is not practical in real life. And here's an example from UCSF describing an automatic segmentation process of cartilage and menisci. So in an ideal case scenario, maybe during the workflows, the normal workflows, the computer can make an automatic segmentation, and then we'll be able to readjust as needed. So that was a description about labeling and annotation. And just a small word in regards of reference standards. So to definitely measure accuracy of AI algorithm, we typically use a small data set of highly high quality annotation. Now, we know that there is inter-observer variability, and therefore the current practice is to obtain annotation from multiple experts. And it can be a very time-demanding and very costly task. And if we took an example of ImageNet, where millions of pictures were actually annotated, then we start thinking how they did it. And here's a picture from Amazon Mechanical Turk, where essentially people uploaded a project with some money, and people from all over the world could annotate the pictures and actually earn some money. So we cannot currently apply it with the medical imaging, but finding a way to crowdsource the annotation can actually become a very powerful tool. So currently we describe the steps from the data collection to automatic annotation. And so what about the machine learning algorithms themselves? So most of the models we use today are off-the-shelf machine learning models that were constructed for ImageNet, which use datasets with 256 by 256 color photograph, usually of natural scenes where animals, people, or objects were annotated. And then we use techniques such as transfer learning. When we use a basic neural network of the layers of the ImageNet challenge, and we add different weighting factors. However, we need to consider the complexity of medical images, including the complex physics behind it, the different resolution or the modalities, and that's without even mentioning like the complex anatomical knowledge and pathology. So there's a place to develop algorithms which are tailored for medical imaging. Speaking of algorithm improvement, so we need data to train the algorithms, but the medical data has some privacy restraints, and institutions cannot share the information easily. As most of the data sets are from single institutions, the data are usually small and often lack the variability, such as patient demography, different types of scanners, and so on. And we had actually a prior journal club where we described that, okay, so if we cannot share the data, perhaps we can actually share the algorithms and let them improve on different data sets. So that's actually another point of research to check how to teach these algorithms without sharing the data. So when we're moving on, we successfully made algorithms which are like acting as decision supporting systems. And as we said, it will probably work with physicians. However, how do we know how do they work? And that actually brings the topic of explainable AI or XAI. And there is a black box phenomena where we actually don't understand how the system is working. And here's an example. We put AP and lateral chest X-rays, and in a miraculous way, it tells us that there is bilateral pleural effusions. Now, by using tools such as silency maps, which are showing us every pixel that was used to make the decision, we can actually start feeling more comfortable and starting to understand how it works. This image was from the Czech expert online. this one is another image from the Bone Age showing like another silency map. And this one was actually from prior also journal club, what does deep learning see, where they use different silency maps and class activation maps to see which pixel were used at each phase of the contrast opacification. So we definitely need to have further research to understand how the algorithms are making the decision. And I feel it's a discussion on its own, and perhaps we could elaborate more in the discussion, but very briefly, with the search to understand how these algorithms are working, it led to a fascinating topic called radiomics or radiogenomics, where there are features which are actually not detectable by human eye, which actually have clinical implications. And that's last point, and before summarizing, but in regards of computing architecture, or in other words, the hardware component, one of the factors enhancing the machine learning methods is not only the concept of deep learning, but also the hardware. With the gaming industry, the GPU performance increased, and this turned out to be actually a perfect tool for CNN, or conventional neural network. Now, hospitals are can choose to use on-premise system, meaning having the computer and all the hardware locally, but this is costly. It demands a lot of infrastructure, IT personnel, and more. However, the data is very secure. Now, here is a Tesla car. Perhaps it's a Model 3. I took it from Google. And apparently, when it went out, people were complaining about the car, how unsatisfied they were. And in a few hours, Tesla actually updated all the models, and everyone was satisfied, which brings us to the next concept of cloud computing, where the infrastructure are remote. It is actually more cost-effective. So there's even options to upgrade the systems, perhaps if we speak about machine learning algorithms. However, there's privacy issues that need to be addressed. So, as a summary, I went briefly through a lot of topics, but the goal of this article was to establish a roadmap and elaborate on key research opportunities to advance machine learning research with medical imaging. Overall, the goal is to produce algorithms that can apply everywhere, not just in communities with wealth of AI researchers. We discussed the need for standardized datasets which are publicly available, methods of automatically labeling and annotating image to be useful for machine learning, the need for new pre-trained architecture which are tailored for medical imaging, federated methods to train the algorithm without transferring the data. We briefly discussed about the potential of machine learning algorithms to improve imaging reconstruction and the great potential of radiogenomics. And overall, we're still very in an early stage to make it work. This will need the collaboration of standards body, professional societies, government, and industry. And as a last note, again, as a resident, I think this article is great as it outlines where we currently stand and what are the next opportunities for anyone which is interested to participate with AI. Yeah, I might went too fast that I expected, but I guess we can start discussions now.
Yes, thank you so much, Dan. That was a very comprehensive overview of what's been going on in machine learning and AI within radiology. To all of our attendees, if you have any particular questions about these things, remember that there is a question function that's built into the GoToWebinar, so feel free to type in any questions. We do still have our panelists here, so Dr. Curtiz Langlotz and Dr. Bibb Allen. Dr. Langlotz, do you have anything that you would like to add after this overview?
Hi, everyone. Curtiz Langlotz here. First of all, I just want to thank Dan for really an excellent summary of the paper. I thought you hit all of the key points and really summarized the paper well. this was really a team effort, and I'm really happy to be here on behalf of the RSNA. We were approached, as the ACR was, in the fall of 2017 to help plan this meeting with NIBIB, one of the institutes of NIH related to imaging, and this workshop that we held in August 2018, as Dan mentioned. I just want to emphasize this was a team effort. So this paper was written based on the output of breakout groups that occurred at the conference itself. So we split out into groups to focus on these various areas and came back with reports. Ultimately, those became part of the paper. So just want to thank Bibb and my other co-authors for all of their input into the manuscript itself. I really don't have much else to say other than I think it was, again, an outstanding summary, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Excellent. All right. So definitely looks like a giant team effort, but a good roadmap overall. Dr. Allen, do you have anything that you'd like to say? Hello.
Well, I always like to say hello. So I'm Bibb Allen, and I'm the Chief Medical Officer for the ACR's Data Science Institute. And like Kurt said, we were delighted to be involved in this effort, working with the NIH, the RSNA, the Academy. I think all of us who are trying to figure out how to make this incredibly powerful tool, bring that to practice. You know, we all realize that, you know, there's so much to do, lots for everybody to do, and so all of our societies are playing a role. With another society that was not really a society, but our Academy of Radiology Research was also a sponsor. But the workshop was really interesting because it brought so many people together, and as Dan said, you know, people from the government, people from industry, but also people from the government from different places. You know, I mean, we would expect the FDA to be there, right? And because the regulatory aspects of this are going to be something that they've really not embarked on, and we can talk more about that next time. But the people from the standards group and the thing, you know, parts of the government that I had never heard of that brought this in there. I think what was it, Kurt? They had probably between the on-site and people doing it over the web, you know, and I think about 400 or 500 people, and many were employees of the government. And I think what you know, it was a little tricky about what we could say about influencing the government, but I think that it was a clear understanding that the idea of bringing all these viewpoints together and having this talk and having it available for all of the people at the NIH to figure out how they can use our tax dollars to fund the stuff that needs to be done to move this into medicine. I was really impressed by that part of it, and Chris can part of it, who was the sort of our point person with the NIH and the NIBIB, was just really great to work with as well. And so, you know, regarding, you know, I'm like Kurt, you know, Dan just did such a phenomenal job. I don't really have anything to add, but like Kurt, happy to give perspectives and, you know, how we're working on, you know, both Kurt and the RSNA and me and Keith Dreyer and the ACR, how we're really working to leverage the clinical skill, the domain expertise of radiologists to work with data sciences and others to really bring us tools to practice that we can use. So that's all I had. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Allen. And we definitely have some attendees that are in agreement with you. one of our comments that's come across is that it's very important for the ACR and the ACR DSI to be able to interface with governmental agencies and decision makers in an impactful and authoritative manner to guide the future of our specialty. High marks for what Dr. Allen is speaking of. So in concert with working with the NIH, were there representatives of other medical specialties as well to see how this path forward in radiology would integrate to the use of AI in a broader sense within the field of medicine?
I'll do that one first. Kurt may, will probably want to add. We, we started working on this program really 8-9 months ahead to figure out what we could do, and we started thinking about, what we would do, and it quickly made us realize that while we would think that we could do it for all of healthcare, and we could do it, and we would want to have ophthalmology and pathology and the other specialties where image-based AI is going to be important, and certainly I think all of the specialties for data mining tools using AI. But there was really so much in medical imaging that we limited to medical imaging, and all of us were even sort of disappointed because we didn't have room for interventional radiology, we didn't have room for radiation oncology, and so this was really tailored only to medical imaging. But I think that from the work that I've done with the college and still doing with the AMA and others, it's really clear that radiology is way out in front of the rest of medicine. And I think that if we can stay out in front, then that our efforts are going to be sort of the poster child for how other specialties should leverage their domain expertise to influence it, to help us take better care of our patients. And I'll let Kurt tell me where I was wrong, but that's kind of what my take of how the workshop came about.
No, absolutely, Bibb. I agree, and I think that it really is the workshop was focusing on imaging specifically, and it's just I think it's true that radiologists and radiology is a little further ahead, and that's largely because we've had digital data online for so long. So as you may know, one of the bottlenecks in this kind of machine learning research is the need for labeled training data, as we mentioned in the article. And the fact that we have PACS databases filled with terabytes and petabytes of images, it gives us a leg up. And the fact that we have radiology reports for every study in the PACS database, we've got a radiology report by a clinical radiologist who's describing what that image shows and could be used as a label. So we're a little closer to having labeled training data, and as a consequence, I think we've seen more research towards decision support systems for radiologists than we see in other specialties. I think that that you've probably heard of from the dermatologists. There was some high-profile research in Nature from here at Stanford about skin lesions that got some press. There's been some good work in ophthalmology that Google has done from photographs of the retina. The pathologists, there's good work in looking at digital pathology slides there. I think the main problem is just data, that there are, to my knowledge, no practices in the US that are all digital pathology practices. There are some, including ours here, that are on the way to digital pathology. So just going through the specialties, I think radiologists are a little further ahead, and that's why many of the speakers had that background, and so we were able to feature some of the research at the frontiers.
Well, that's excellent to hear. Thank you, Drs. Allen and Langlotz. Now, just a reminder for all of the attendees, if you guys have any questions about any of the things that Dr. Allen or Langlotz have mentioned, feel free to put that in the question box and we will get to that. As far as this overall summary of the roadmap forward, there were options for increasing data availability and sharing, for new image recon methods, new image labeling methods, machine learning methods, machine learning explanation methods, computing architecture. What do you guys see as the best way for somebody who's relatively new to AI to get involved in the AI space within radiology?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. I think it all begins with just some basic learning. So the fact that you're reading this article is helpful. There are some really nice sources of education through what's called the National Imaging Informatics course. So you can learn about informatics and AI. This is a course that your residency can sign up for. It's relatively inexpensive. It's co-sponsored by SIM and RSNA, and it's a week-long course. So that would be a nice way to get an introduction. There are a number of educational opportunities at the RSNA annual meeting. So there's a hands-on where you can sit down with your laptop, and there's a series of courses offered all through the week that can really give you a flavor for what it's like to be a data scientist, starting with a fairly introductory type of program. Then there's some really nice online programs. The one that I recommend most is called AI for Everyone, and it's a site, deeplearning.ai. This is Andrew Ng, who's one of the computer scientists here at Stanford, and he's a very good teacher and educator, and made this particular course for folks like us who, for radiologists who may not have a technical background, who want to learn a little more about it. And then if you really do have more of a technical background, don't mind the formulas and things, there is a nice course on Coursera, another one of these online courses. And a variety, there's a whole curriculum on deeplearning.ai that you may find useful. Just a point about education too and how important it is. I like to make the analogy to, residents may not remember this, but I certainly do, when MRI was new. This was when I was younger. And there were people at the time who said that maybe we don't need radiologists to read MRI. It's just the abnormalities are so clear on the images, and we'll just run the patient through the scanner, and that the general practitioner, the internist or the primary care doc is going to be able to look at the image and figure out what the problem is and decide on treatment from there. But of course, it's not that easy, right? So you need to know something about the physics of the device so that you can protocol it, decide on a protocol, configure the device so that it's more likely to answer the clinical question that's posed. And of course, you need to recognize artifacts like phase artifacts and other things that are not actually abnormalities where you can really be led astray. So as a consequence, in our training programs, then we began to learn a lot about the physics of MRI, not enough to build an MRI device, but enough to be able to harness it on behalf of our patients. And so I think that's a pattern of radiologists partnering with engineers really since way back to the dawn of X-rays, but especially since from like the 70s until now. Back in the 70s, everybody was reading X-rays. That's all we had. And then we've gone through ultrasound, CT, MR, all these revolutions, PACS. And I think this is just the next one. And we as radiologists will have to own the training and learn about how to harness AI so that we can recognize its shortcomings and use it effectively in the diagnosis and treatment of patients.
Yeah, this is Bibb again. I think Kurt, really summed it up well regarding what it's going to be like for radiologists to use AI in their practices. I'm probably a day or two older than Kurt, but basically in my residency we didn't have any. I mean, this is something that for MR is something that radiologists of my age basically taught ourselves to do from courses, from other things like that, and that we were sort of, you know, and we were able to do it. As Kurt said, I look at it this way, you know, we know how to change the TR and the TE. We know how to change the B value for diffusion weighted images. We know how to set those dials, and we can sit at the console and do that. But we don't have to write the code that goes from the console to the magnet to make that experiment work. And I think the same may be true with AI. I mean, I think that we're going to need to know enough about how it works, what the pitfalls are, what different hyperparameters do to change the way the algorithm performs. You know, as we talk, you know, the next time, you know, about the translational parts, we'll probably talk a little bit more about the requirement for diversity in training data. Algorithms that are trained at a single institution, they hold back, say, 20% of the data set. The algorithm performs beautifully on that 20%, and then you take it somewhere else and it becomes brittle. And so the idea is, how can we expose the model to more data, more diverse data, and probably even more importantly, how do we, before we have our agencies like the FDA say, well, this is okay for clinical use, how do we know that we can validate it across you know, diverse data sets and widespread use? So I think we're going to wanting to be able to evaluate AI algorithms in our practices. One of the things that the college has, because of the clinical trials program, because of the registries, because of accreditation, is a network where thousands of institutions across the country are connected. And you know, Keith, and I'll give him credit, but it was really a lot of us thinking about it, and it started out with how to solve some of these data issues of, and I want to, you know, ask Kurt to talk a lot more before we finish. I was going to ask him a question more about federated learning and distributed solutions to keeping data on-prem. But the idea is that, can we use that network is called Triad, and can we use that Triad systems, Triad server, and layer on top of that a software stack that allows you to aggregate data from your packs, you know, on that server, and then use pre-trained models that, you know, so many are in the public domain. Again, can you tune that model? Can you actually use, Dan talked about transfer learning, can you teach it to do something else? I mean, can you take a model that was sort of an ankle fracture detector and make it a wrist fracture detector? That's a pretty general thing, but I think that these are tools that are going to be in the realm of things that we can do, and the college is calling this the AI lab. And again, it'll be an opportunity to do some hands-on work, learning about AI, learning how to evaluate algorithms, learning how to you know, tune an algorithm using your own data. And we've got a sort of the cloud-based version of it right now, where you can go, you just go to ACR. AIlab.acr.org, and can start kind of playing around. It's a little bit like the TensorFlow playground as far as what you can do. It's pretty basic right now, but the idea is over the next few months to be able to start, you know, introducing some of these concepts. And I think one of the ways that people that want to learn about it will be able to use that environment to do some, you know, actual hands-on work. You know, the Journal Club, I don't know if it was the last one or the one before last, was a great demonstration about you know, building a classifier you know, in Python. And I think that just getting down and dirty are probably going to be the ways to learn enough about it that it'll help us. But But Kurt, tell us how do you see federated learning helping us accelerate AI and getting AI into clinical practice?
Yeah, I think federated learning is very exciting. So the basic concept, just for those who may not know, is that generally what we have done in the past is to bring all the data into one place and use, that's our training data set. So we take examples, training examples, and we feed them through our neural network. And then based on whether the network gets the answer right or wrong, we know how to tweak the parameters of the model a little bit each time, so it gets better and better over millions and billions of iterations. It gets to be very, very accurate. The problem with that is generalizability. So these models, if they're trained in one hospital, on the data from one hospital, they're not that likely to work well on data from another hospital. So to get a nice, robust model that's generalizable, you want a variety of training data from multiple institutions. Well, that's difficult because of our privacy, our needs for data privacy and security for healthcare, and the difficulty in transferring data between institutions. So a number of bright researchers said, hey, why don't we move the model around, move the AI coefficients around to different institutions and keep the data where it is? And are there ways that we can confidentially, without revealing the patient's identities, use their data nevertheless as training data? And so you can rotate the model. Let's say you had 6 or so institutions. This may have been, I think this was a journal club, maybe Bibb, that's what you're referring to. I'm sorry, I haven't been up on what was what all your past journal clubs were, but the idea of moving the model around rather than moving the data around. So that's a very powerful concept. I would say the one that concerns I have, and these are, I think, surmountable, but you need to be very careful about your labeling method. So we find that we need to be very careful, even if we're just labeling a data set for our own, that we start with a pilot labeling effort, because we find that different labelers have different meanings of different words. We find that sometimes the labels have hierarchical relationships. So some people think that, pneumonia and atelectasis are both consolidations. Some people think that pneumonia and consolidation are synonyms and atelectasis is something else. And some people use the word infiltrate, although most people think that's not a good word to use at all. And then there's this alveolar opacity. And so understanding and making sure that you have consistency between the hierarchical relationships of all the concepts is really important. And having a consistent labeling method across these institutions is going to be very critical as well. So that's again, a surmountable problem, but it's something that you really need to think carefully about if you're planning to train on data from multiple places. Just imagine any of you who've practiced in multiple locations, maybe if you're residents you haven't yet, but when you move, you'll notice, wow, the style of reports between different practices varies quite a bit. And if you're using the radiology report, for example, as your labels, that can vary, we've noticed as well, as we've done analyses of the natural language. So really fascinating. I think it is something that we'll see more and more of, this kind of federated learning, particularly for rare diseases where an individual institution doesn't have enough cases of any single disease. So I'm looking forward to seeing more of that.
That is a great point, Dr. Langlotz. I think Indiana's version of having slight differences in the lexicon would probably be the difference between heterogeneous and heterogeneous that kind of exists here. A similar discrepancy between one term or another between institutions. As far as labeling itself actually goes, theoretically, it would be best if we could have an infinite number of defined labels, but could put every applicable label to each piece of data, each imaging study. So is the best strategy for us to start labeling data for one specific purpose, or does it make more sense to label each study with as many things as we could think apply to it in a more standardized method, and then have a broader use for each of the studies later on.
I can make a couple comments about that. One is that labeling is expensive if it's human labeled, expert labeled, which is, I think, what you were talking about. So generally, I would want to start with a particular problem that I want to solve. So we talk about use cases. The ACR has developed use cases. I think many research laboratories start with use cases, say, well, what problem do I want to solve, and then label to the problem, rather than saying, you know what, we're just going to generate a lot of labels and not exactly being clear as to how those labels might be used. The other point, and this is something that was really surprising to me actually when I first learned it, is that these neural network machine learning methods are fairly tolerant of noisy, error-prone labels. So there's a relationship. One of the papers referenced in the roadmap paper we've been discussing today talks about the relationship between data set size and label noise. So if you say, if I had perfect labels, I need 1,000 cases. If you have 10% error in your labels, you need about 50% more cases. If you have 20% error, you need about 3 times the cases. So that may seem challenging, but actually, given how many images we have, we've got plenty of images. We just don't have enough labels. So if you can come up with an automated method to label your images, even if it's not perfect, that can be a very powerful way to generate training data for AI. So in natural language processing, we think about information extraction. Can we pull out the concepts from the report and say, oh, this patient has a renal cell carcinoma, this patient has a lung mass, this patient has some other condition, and you can use those as labels. Again, it's not perfect because sometimes there's a lot of hedging, or the negation may not be easily detected by the algorithm, or some other word is used that's non-standard. So that's one, what we call noisy labeling method. Another might be just thresholding, right? So if your tumor is bright, you can go in and say, well, which pixels are brighter than a certain amount? And maybe with some other quick computational methods, you can pretty rapidly come up with what you think is likely to be the lung nodule compared to the lung surrounding it. And now that might need to be corrected some by a human, but at least you've given the human a head start with some automated methods. So these automated and semi-automated noisy labeling methods are very, very powerful tools for AI researchers.
To Kurt's point, one of the things that we saw when we were putting together the set for the just to demo the AI lab, and it was another fairly simple classifier where we did used the data from the DMIS trial, which was the first digital mammography trial, and it's tens of thousands of images. But it was, the breast density was classified just by one observer, one observation, and it was that, and so as the algorithm was trained on those data, it was interesting to see where the algorithm then disagreed with the training data, right? So it would run, but then the algorithm would say, well, after you're looking at all 60,000 of these, I know I'm supposed to say that this one was heterogeneously dense, but it's really scattered fibroglandular densities based on the algorithm. And then some of the fun that we had at the ACR annual meeting was to let people that were there look at those and sort of be, sort of a second reader for the ground truth. And we're actually looking at that and seeing how that, correcting some of those just based on where the algorithm said it needed to be corrected, how that can improve the overall performance of the algorithm. So, these are interesting things. I was going to ask Kurt one other question. We talked about rare diseases. Where do you see synthetic data going now to help us solve some of those rare disease problems?
Yeah. Well, I think both for rare and non-rare diseases, synthetic data can be really important. So I guess the more basic form of that are things like rotations. You can rotate the data a little bit. You can flip it one way or the other, at least in certain applications. You don't want to be flipping chest x-rays. You don't want to be rotating chest x-rays 180 degrees. So I guess you could say that's where some clinical judgment comes in. You want to do clinically relevant perturbations of the data, because if you're looking at ICU chest films, for example, the patients are going to be tilted one way or another, and you want the algorithm to be tolerant of that. That's kind of the basic. But then you start saying, well, wait a minute, isn't there a way, rather than have us have to think up what's a valid transform of this image that's clinically valid, can we build a neural network that would propose data? So there are these, we mentioned it only briefly in the paper, generative adversarial networks, which have gotten a lot of press, I think, in healthcare, mainly because they can sometimes create crazy ways to defeat the algorithm and have it say something that's clearly wrong based on an imperceptible noise pattern that's superimposed on the image. But they can also be incredibly useful. You can have a kind of battle between two adversaries. So you have one network that's producing an image and trying to fool a second network that's trying to detect whether that image is a fake image or a real image. And you're feeding it both. Some images that are created by this generative network and some images that are real. And over time, that generative network can get very, very good at creating images that look real, even though they're not. And so that's another way that you can create anatomically correct, if you will, or nearly correct training data for these models. So I would say that would work pretty well. I'm not sure, unfortunately, that method works as well on rare diseases, just because you need still a lot of examples of the rare disease to train the generative network to generate more examples. But still, I think those methods generally are going to be very important. The ability to generate fake training data can still be very important in helping these models learn more quickly.
Well, thank you all so much, Dr. Allen, Dr. Langlotz. Thank you to Dr. Dan Cohen for your awesome summary of that giant set of papers. Hopefully you guys all learned something tonight. I personally think a ton of this stuff is super exciting, super interesting. If you are interested in trying to get more involved, some of the resources that were mentioned have been shared on Twitter. Also in the chat for this. So feel free to check out the RadAIJC hashtag. It should give a couple of those resources there. We will have a recording of this uploaded to our session, and if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to any of the members of the committee, ACR, RFS, however you feel like you can get your questions across, please feel free to do so. But thank you again so much, Drs. Allen, Langlotz, and Cohen, for joining us. And I hope you all have a great night. Thanks for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much, guys.
Yes, thank you.